I'm about to make a huge mistake when it comes to making a cut on the table saw. Can you tell why? If not, keep watching. Many of you may be using a table saw incorrectly and you didn't even know it. And so in today's video, I'm going to show you some tips that will help you use your table saw more effectively and more safely. Tip number one, use hearing protection. Ear damage or hearing loss can start at about 80 to 85 decibels. And the average table saw can put out about 100 decibels of sound intensity. And that doesn't even include if you're running a dust collector with your table saw, which you probably should be doing. So make sure to pick up a good pair of earmuffs or hearing protection. This is what I like. This is from 3M. They're not sponsored, but I do like their product. I'll link it in the description. Tip number two, make sure you always wear safety glasses or goggles as well. Even if you're running your table saw with a dust collector, things like splinters can still shoot back at you, and it's no fun. Trust me, I've been there many times. It's no fun to have something in your eye. In fact, I've been to the doctor several times. I've had to get my eyelid flipped inside out. They put that dye in your eye to find out where the splinter is. They wipe it out, and it's a very traumatic experience. So just wear goggles. It's like a $20 investment. Leave some right next to your table saw so you won't be tempted to not use them. I'll link these in the description. When you are cutting certain types of materials, make sure you also wear a respirator. This respirator is from 3M. Once again, I've paid money for this and I'm a huge fan of it. I wear this whenever I am cutting black walnut on my table saw or any kind of saw because black walnut dust is toxic. I also use it when I'm cutting cured epoxy because that's basically plastic. You don't want that in your lungs. So even though you have a dust collector, it's not an excuse to not wear this to protect your lungs. Safety is key. If you're not working safely, it can damage your hearing, your eyesight, your lungs. Just make sure you're working safely. Tip number next, you never want to use your fence and your miter gauge at the same time. And here's the principle why. You never want to have pressure or a touch point on both sides of this blade. And so if you are running this workpiece through, you have a touch point here and you have a touch point here. What can happen is this piece of wood that's getting cut off can get pinched in between the fence and the saw blade and kick back at you. A lot of people think the only way you can get injured with a table saw is by touching your hand to the blade and cutting off a finger, which definitely can happen. But actually many injuries occur when a piece of wood shoots back at someone and gouges them in the chest or something like that. So never do this. Now a simple solution to this problem is to take a 1, 2, 3 block, measure out wherever you need to cut so you can get the repeatable cuts of a fence, and then when you move your workpiece forward, the 1, 2, 3 block stays there, and now we are not making contact with our fence. So I know the fence is great for repeatable cuts. Invest in a 1, 2, 3 block, link in description. Put this here and you can then cut multiple times, but have a touch point only on one side of the blade. One thing I find myself doing super consistently with my table saw is cutting rip bevels, or I'll cut a board long ways, at an angle. Now when I was first starting with this, I would look at the little gauge on the front of my saw stop table saw and say, oh, I need to set it to 22.5 degrees. Well, let me do that real quickly. And I would get kind of close. This is a terrible way to accurately measure angles. This gauge, it might get you within a degree or two, but it's not accurate at all. So instead, invest in a little digital angle gauge, which will get you 1/10 of a degree accuracy. All you have to do is set the digital angle gauge on the table of your table saw and zero it out because your floor may not be perfectly level. Then once you have it zeroed out, just attach the magnetic angle gauge to your saw blade, get it to the precise angle, and voila, you're making much more accurate cuts. One more tip when it comes to the digital angle gauge, whenever you have set your saw blade to an angle like 45 degrees or 22.5 degrees, whenever you are returning it to a perfect 90, use your digital angle gauge then as well to make sure that your blade is perpendicular to your tabletop. Another common mistake that I used to be guilty of, and I see a lot of people, even on YouTube, still make, is they have way too much of their table saw blade exposed or too much of their blade above the table. And this is really dangerous because it's basically just more surface area that could potentially catch your finger or something else and yank it into the blade and causing serious injury. And so always lower your blade so that the top of the blade is only about 1/8 to 1/4 of an inch above the top of your workpiece. Okay, another safety tip. I talked to you about this at the beginning of the video, and I am about to do something super dangerous with a table saw. You should be able to tell right now just by looking at me, and the fact is I am not wearing the proper clothes. You might be like, Ben, what are you talking about? Two problems. I'm wearing a pretty baggy hoodie that has drawstrings, and think about it, when I lean over a table saw, what's hanging down? These drawstrings. I even have hoodies that are longer, and so at the very least, tuck these inside your shirt. But I would really recommend, if you have a shop that's warm, wear a t-shirt that doesn't have floppy sleeves that can get caught in a table saw blade or drawstrings. A lot of times we just think about watching where our body is in relation to the blade, but if you have something baggy that's hanging down and it gets caught up in the blade, it's going to pull your body into the saw blade. So don't wear a hoodie, don't wear baggy clothes, just be safe. All right, another table saw mistake that I am actually currently making is that I do not have any kind of Outfeed support or Outfeed table. And you might think, Ben, why is this a big deal? It matters because if you have a workpiece that is longer, let's say, and it starts hanging off, it's gonna pull this up, which is going to tempt you to put more pressure on the workpiece while it's closer to the blade. It's also going to want to tempt you to lean over to support that workpiece, and you're leaning over the table saw blade. And so don't do that. Instead, invest in building an Outfeed table or some kind of Outfeed system so that you can work safely. I'll be building an Outfeed table in the coming weeks and months on this channel. I'll probably make like a multiple part video series. So if you're interested in that, subscribe, or if it's already on the channel, I'll link it in the description. But yeah, make sure you have an Outfeed system. It will keep you safer in the shop. Next tip, this probably goes without saying, but you must have a dust collector of some sort if you're going to have a table saw in your shop. Table saws produce tons of sawdust, and so this is the dust collector that I use. I love it. It's a Powermatic. It's linked in the description. I'll link it in the description, but it's a Powermatic, and I love it. I paid full price for it. They're not sponsoring this video or anything, but it does a great job at removing the bulk of the dust. Now, you want to make sure you do other things besides just a dust collector, because this isn't going to get every little particle of dust. So like I said earlier, make sure you're wearing a respirator or have ambient dust collection in your shop to make sure you're keeping your lungs safe, but you've got to have a dust collector. This is a great one. If you want more details, check the description. Okay, so this video focusing on the table saw was a little more focused on safety tips to make sure you stay safe, which is our #1 priority. We should always want to do everything safely. But I know there's lots of tips for making more accurate cuts, different things you can add on to your table saw to make things more efficient or quick or anything like that. So let me know in the comments. I want to learn from you. What tools do you use on your table saw to make it more efficient? What do you do for Outfeed solutions? Do you have an Outfeed table, or do you have some kind of jig? There might be something that is just totally new that you can teach me. So I would love to learn from all of you. So if you don't mind, let me know in the comments. I would really love to learn. I'd love to make a follow-up video kind of compiling all the things that you guys have taught me. So the priority though is that we should stay safe in the woodworking shop. The table saw, if you're like me, it's the heart of my shop. I'm using it the most. And so make sure that, you're staying safe when you're using it. I hope you've enjoyed this video. If you have, if you've learned something, I'd really appreciate it if you hit the like button. And if you haven't learned anything, or if I haven't learned it, that's totally fine. There's no pressure. It just helps me out when you hit the like button. Other than that, I would love it if you can check out another video on my channel. If you don't have time, I totally understand, and I'll talk to you soon.